right, Assembly Member, thank you so much for joining us here today. I guess your first reaction initially to seeing that video of Robert Brooks at Marcy.
Horrified. It was a horrific footage. Murder, modern day lynching. We watched 14 officers systematically beat on a Mr. Robert Brooks. And in fact, Tom, they took turns. So if you reviewed the footage from each officer's camcorder, which was turned off, thank God for technical blessings, right? But if you look at each officer's recording, they took turns on Robert. So there's 4 or 5 officers inside the room, 3 outside the room. 2 will go out and exchange their gloves. The other 3 will walk in, work on Robert some more. It was a modern day lynching. I didn't see no compassion. I see no concern. I see no worryation. The men were comfortable doing what they did to Robert Brooks.
Yeah, I watched the interview you did this morning on Pix, and it's interesting, for someone as yourself that is formerly incarcerated. I've spoken to some other formerly incarcerated individuals about this culture and dynamic that they didn't describe, and there's an anxiety and a trauma I think I've noticed. And someone I spoke with yesterday said they couldn't watch the video, they didn't need to watch the video. I guess it sparks a very powerful emotion. I'd imagine hearing this and seeing this from someone. I imagine that you've seen something like this before, right?
It's difficult trying to contain all your emotions and so on and so forth. I experienced violence by the hands of officers in mid-state correctional facility myself, and the story is just ongoing. We have additional 43 names of officers and sergeants. Assembly member Damon Meeks and I, we went on a tour there, and we got additional names and staffers, and we're just horrified by the conditions that docs are currently operating under, especially in particular in Marcy and Mohawk.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, did you speak with any individuals that are incarcerated there? What was your experience like in meeting with people there?
Well, again, so one of the, I won't say great, one of the tools that you get as a assembly member, you are able to walk in and out of a correctional facility as long as you have this lapel, you're great. Going inside to the institutions and talking to the incarcerated individuals, both at Marcy and at Mohawk, we separated them, we isolated them, and we talked to them about what they heard, what they knew, the events leading up to Robert Brooks' death, their experiences at the facilities. And I could give you so many examples. One that's always in my head, and I think about this incarcerated individual every night is, this young man, he was in one of the dorms we went and visited. He had a cast on his arm, and he was very distant. And I was wondering why he was distant. And I asked one of the incarcerated individuals about his story, what's going on with this guy? Why is he in his cubicle alone? And he told me, say, hey, this man just beat up by 3 officers. And if he's comfortable, he will share with you. So as the first formerly incarcerated New York State legislature, he felt comfortable enough to share. He said, hey, look, 4 officers, 2 of them who's out guarding his door right now, broke my arms. One of the lieutenants, his girlfriend works in the infirmary, so she didn't want to say it was broken. She said it was a sprain, and they gave me a gorge. He cried in agony for a couple of days, and then they finally took him to the hospital, Tom. And then they found that his arm was broken, actually in 2 places. It's systemic racism. I seen 14 men who hated a black guy. That's what I seen. 14 men who hated a black person. Handcuffed, 140 something pounds. The average officer in that room was 250 plus. Robert Brooks couldn't have won that fight if his hands was untied.
Why does this happen?
It's systemic, Tom. It's the way of the world. And when you have prisons located up in counties that don't reflect us, or there aren't too many of us, you know, it's hunting season for them up here. The incarcerated individuals told me, he said, hey, look, we're 4 or 5 hours away from the city. Family won't come visit us. Corrections guard our mail. They guard our phone calls. They know what we say. They know what we write. It's no protection for them. And being 5 hours away, it hurts. I got to drive back there tomorrow, and I'm somewhat thinking about the 5 hour drive, right?
What is your response to those that say a use of force is needed to control this atmosphere, and that this was a case where it went too far?
Um, this man is handcuffed and at some point shackled. Explain it to me, please. This man was handcuffed and shackled. He was transferred from Mohawk. And within 20 minutes of being transferred from Mohawk, 15 miles away, from Mohawk to Marcy, this man is found on the grounds in front of a fence in Marcy Corrections being pounded on by Officer Anslow and 2 other officers. And then you look at the other body cam footage, you see 2 or 3 fans rushing to the site. And when these men run into the site, it creates this, and they went to work on it right there in front of the fence. And then you see one of the officers open up the van so they can put him in the van and take him to the infirmary. No, Officer Anslow said, no, we want to drag him to the infirmary. No, it's awful. It's awful and it's rampant.
You had a colleague on the Senate side during one of the protest rally, I could say over the course of the summer at Great Meadow, when that was slated to be closed. They were rallying against that closure. Described incarcerated individuals as animals twice.
Hmm.
What do you think that language, how do you think that impacts this culture?
Awful. Totally awful. Tom, I know what these men and women did to get in prison wasn't so great, right? These men committed a crime, they committed an act, and ultimately they were imprisoned. They were sentenced to serve time. That's their sentence, to serve time, to go into prison, to rehabilitate, to correct your behavior, and then come home and do something marvelous in your community. That's what they're tasked with, not going into prison and being subjected to abuse by those in authorities, in particular white men. It looked like a modern day lynching, Tom.
You're calling on the Mohawk and Marcy to be closed. Is that right?
Certainly,
Why is
certainly. I'm
that?
talking about foreclosure. Hey, look, it's rampant in there. We have 43 additional names, officers and sergeants. Again, when we went in there, Assemblymember Damon Meeks and I, we talked to every incarcerated individuals in every dorm, every other dorm. And we spoke to 2 or 3 staffers who were really afraid to talk there. And I'm talking about African American staffers, right? Because they were 2 or 3 who was on that night with someone else in the jail. They wouldn't even allow them to come near the scene. But one of them told me they heard the yelling, the screaming, the excruciating pain that Brooks was going through. And I even thought I won't get into that part of the conversation. But this one officer said he had an opportunity. He would have walked out to his vehicle and got his. It was that bad, Tom. He heard the screams, the yells, the pleas. Um, what can you do? You're an African American officer surrounded by white officers who live in that town and in that county.
Two years ago, the Correctional Association of New York went to Marcy and said, there's issues here. 80% of the people we spoke to reported some sort of abuse that they had experienced. 2/3 of that was, they said, based on racism and the racial disparities there. Why did nothing happen, do you think, between then and now to address any of this? At least that's from.
No, there's no body cam. There's no footage up until today, up until the 9th, excuse me, up until December 9th. Never nobody recovered or recorded incidents. Um, Marcy is ridden with people from the town of Oneida who are familiar with one another. Some are dating each other. And so, it's hard for an incarcerated individual to beat a hearing or to beat a charge laid by a superintendent in a facility when the hearing officer is the lieutenant's girlfriend or next door neighbor or cousin. And so you have all these white folks. I'm not saying all white folks are bad, but you have a bunch of white folks from these counties who don't feel so happy with us. And they have the authority over us and they just taking advantage. And it becomes rampant. And so when there's no reporting, there's no repercussions, it intensifies. Just so happened that Robert Brooks was killed and it was caught on camera.
What do you hope happens next? Maybe even at the legislature level. I know the Salazar, I think Fahey was the other one on that bill to get the inspector general more involved in these investigations, especially when it comes to sexual assault. The assembly hasn't really moved on that side of the aisle, that side of the spectrum. I guess what is next here from the legislature for this call for oversight?
Good question. I just had a conversation with Senator Salazar about 15, 20 minutes ago. We are uber focused on the closure right now. We understand that you can't fix this system. The system is broken. You know, you have Klan members there. You have folks who just don't like Black people in Marcy. And, you know, Candy gave you that report 2 years ago. 80% of the people say they are abused there. Listen, they're telling the truth. They're telling the truth. But these men are scared. They scared, Tom. Remember Meeks and I went in and these men were scared. I had to really like encourage them to speak to me. Hey, I'm formerly incarcerated. I served 5.5 years. I was next door in mid-state. You're safe with me. Your story is safe with me. Let's fix this system together. And these men and women and staff, two staff came up with a bunch of names and said, hey, you want to fix it? You got to get rid of these officers. These are the hit squads.
You said 43? Was that the number?
43. We have 43 officers total from Marcy and Mohawk.
Uh, the
Affectionately
Klan
called the hit
member
squad.
thing, where did you hear that from? Where does that come from? I'm serious.
That's the census in prison, right? You know, you got a bunch of them up there. The incarcerated individuals know who they working with. They hear the conversations every day. They call niggas and all the time. The degradation in them prisons, Tom, it's awful. It's awful. And you know, and I can imagine the language them 14 officers were using while murdering Robert Brooks. Just imagine the language.
Where do you see a change coming?
Closing down the facilities.
Hmm.
See, you close down the facilities and you set a tone, you set an example. The following towns and the following, and it's not the only reason, but the following towns will say, hey, look, we got to correct this behavior. New York State is not allowing incarcerated individuals to be systematically beaten inside these walls of fences. It has to stop.
And you get these communities that do push back on that. That's what we saw in Great Meadow, right? Like that was the big, hey, this is a economic driver for this area.
Unfortunately, you know, if your whole town was based on surviving economically because of a prison, I think you're living in the wrong town. Um, you know, people come home, things change, prison closes. Um, Unfortunately, we can't allow that prison to remain open and allow you to systematically beat Black men. Just can't happen.
In terms of moving yourself here, at speaking from your experience, I guess how this resonate with you? I mean, how will this drive you moving forward? And like, we know that there's rallies at the Capitol all the time in terms of sentencing reform and all this other stuff. I guess what is personally, I guess, how connected is this for you moving forward?
This incident reawakened my dormant feelings about, you know, correction officers and my time spent in prison. And it took me back to mid-state where I was assaulted by officers and not no repercussions whatsoever, right? It was no follow-up hearing, no follow-up disciplinary actions. It was okay, go back to your dorm, put ice on your head, you'll be okay. These guys, these men and women, you know, they have to run a facility, you know, and they all in cahoots with one another. You know, they was attempting to cover it up right then and there in the infirmary. That wall of silence. You seen the big lieutenant and the sergeant and the other lieutenant came in and they tried to fix some paperwork stuff out. It was a cover up in an attempt. But the body cam. If we didn't have the body cam, Tom, we'd have been saying, Brooks is an awful man. He tried to kill a correction officer. He tried to shank an officer, or he hit a staffer, or tried to rape somebody. They would have changed that charge. They would have justified that whipping, that beating. But now you got the footage. What can you do? You got to suck it up.
Do you think the governor and attorney general are doing enough right now?
It's more to do. It's more to do. I'm not focused on the criminal charges, Tom. You know, courts are never friendly towards us. I'm looking at to make sure that this never happens again. And I'm uber focused on closing a system, a prison that systematically beat black men, at least 80% of the black men in its facility. We have to shut it down.
Assembly Member Gibbs, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
But Tom, let me ask you one more question before we go, Tom. Just
Yeah.
one more. We know that Queens and New York City, predominantly black, right? Predominantly African American in some parts, right? Say that Queens had a correctional facility there. And in this facility was an incarcerated individual, Caucasian individual, handcuffed, shackled, surrounded by 14 black officers, routinely pounding, kicking, punching, even with a boot, smacked in the face with boots, handcuffed, shackled, while handcuffed, shackled, stripped, beat again.
You still there?
I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah. What were
And
you
what will
saying?
happen next day? What will happen next day, Tom?
Yeah.
They would turn that jail over, and those 14 officers will be under the jail. So racism and favoritism, man, and we got to fix the system.
And it's interesting, like I said, I've spoken to several individuals here in this space, and that is a theme of where these facilities are located is one barrier, the age of them, but of course, the location, but also what's inside, right? There's a couple different dynamics there that play into this. And you bring up that, I guess, hypothetical and how that could change the difference in the reaction to that, but all that would change how things work, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I also want to say too, Austin, I mean, sorry, Tom, all officers aren't bad. And I say it again, all officers aren't bad. It's the system, not the officers.